Hi, welcome to Cutmytvtime recap. A musician was killed in an accident. His soul leaves the body. In order to come back to the living world, he has to come back in the cat's body. Today we will recap the animation story 2020 movie Soul by Pixar. A man named Joe is passionate about his music career. Unfortunately, he does not make enough money as a musician. So, he works part-time at a public high school. But most of his students do not even like learning music. It makes Joe sad. While he teaches his classes one day, the principal interrupts Joe's class to tell him that he will be hired as a full-time faculty member. But instead of feeling happy, he feels concerned and very unhappy with the job offer. Then, Joe visits his mother to let her know about his promotion. Instead of asking what Joe wants to do, his mother, Libba, pressures Joe to take the job for its security. She makes Joe promise that he will give up on being a musician. While Joe talks to his mom, a former student of Joe named Curly calls to tell Joe about a gig with Dorothy Ho Williams, one of the greatest jazz singers in the country. The pianist in the band has quit. The band is looking for a new replacement. Joe wants to take a test at the theater with high enthusiasm. But Dorothea belittles Joe after learning that he is only a high school teacher. She does not want to give Joe an opportunity to test. But Joe does not give up. Joe goes to the piano, and the test begins. But Dorothea does not tell Joe what song to play. So, Joe observes cello player and starts playing with the band. Seeing Joe's skills, Dorothea asks Joe to perform a solo. Joe gives himself completely to the music and plays exceptionally well. When he completes the song, Dorothea is impressed. She asks him to come back for rehearsal at 7 o'clock at night. Joe is overjoyed. After leaving the theater, he gets distracted with excitement while walking home. Joe falls to the opening manhole in the street, falling all the way down to his death. Later, Joe regains his consciousness and realizes that he is on a giant treadmill that sent him into the gigantic light source. Joe runs in the opposite direction, where he meets other spirits who tell Joe that they all have passed away. If Joe enters the light, his spirits will pass to the next life. However, Joe is still in denial and insists that he can't miss Dorothea's concert. Then, he starts walking away from the light. While the light is pulling him in, he starts running in panic against the flow of the crowd. Joe climbs up on top of the spirits and steps on their heads. In desperation, he falls off the treadmill, crossing a protective barrier and falling through several dimensions until he reaches a blue grass. When Joe gets up, he tries to hide from other spirits. But he soon finds himself surrounded by other little spirits who want to play with him. A strange-looking spirit who is in charge of taking care of these little souls appears. The strange spirit explains that they are in the area where unborn spirits are prepared before rebirth. When Joe gets up, he tries to hide from other spirits. But he soon finds himself surrounded by other little spirits who want to play with him. A strange-looking spirit who is in charge of taking care of these little souls appears. The strange spirit explains that they are in the area where unborn spirits are prepared before rebirth. Jerry transforms into a horse and takes Joe to the portal, which will lead Joe back to Earth. As soon as Joe sees the portal, he feels ecstatic and immediately jumps straight into portal with the other souls. But, for some unknown reason, he is sucked back into the grate. Feeling confused, Joe stares at the portal. Another Jerry approaches him and asks if Joe is a soul mentor. Joe does not understand what is going on or what Jerry is talking about. So, he refuses to get in line. Joe tells Jerry that he needs to leave. Jerry replies that the only place Joe can go is the great beyond. So, Joe pretends to be a soul mentor and heads to the training. Elsewhere, the soul cower, who is in charge of the great beyond, realizes that a soul is missing. It then reports the problem to Jerry. The soul cower then goes to the register room and checks millions of records one by one to find out who is the missing soul. In the mentor class, the instructor explains that all the souls in the great beyond need to complete their personalities before they can go back and be reborn on the earth. But for this to happen, it is the task of the mentor to assist the young souls to dig down and complete their personality spark. Each young soul must find out what they like. At the end of the lectures, Jerry appears and announces that it's time to bring the mentors and soul trainees together. Jerry calls for Dr. Borgensen. Since Jerry did not call for Joe, Joe just stayed in his seat. But soon he realizes that the badge he stole is from this doctor. So, he needs to go on stage to maintain his cover. Then, Jerry calls the soul number 22 on the stage. Number 22 is a very special old soul who has had great mentors such as Muhammad Ali, Marie Antoinette, Nicholas Copernicus. However, number 22 was unable to find his spark. Thus, number 22 can't be reborn and passed on to the earth. Jerry drops Joe's face and opens the portal of the view dimension. A mysterious place that shows the most important moments of the mentor's life. Number 22 asks Joe to give up and go to the great beyond. But, since he needs the badge that is on her chest, he reveals that he is not Dr. Borgensen and shows the highlight of his life. Unlike any of his predecessors, the highlight of Joe's life is nothing but failure in his career and personal life. While life flashes before Joe's eye, he sees his unconscious body in the hospital and asks for the badge of 22. So, he can return to his body. 22 then explains that the badge is always attached to her until she can pass. Joe proposes to help 22, knowing that she does not want to be reborn. To find 22's spark, Joe decides to take her to the Hall of Everything. As the name implies, this is a place where the young spirit can experience and discover everything they want to find inspiration in. Joe tries to show 22 the pleasure of culinary. But, in the spirit world, they could not smell, touch, or taste the food. Thus, Joe can't really show 22 how wonderful food really is. After his failure, Joe tries to show 22 different activities like putting out fires or doing gymnastics. Eventually, they leave the room of everything, feeling disappointed. Jerry shows up to tell Joe that his time is up. Now he must continue to the great beyond. But, 22 begs Jerry for more time because she does not want to go to Earth either. At her request, Jerry leaves them be. Later, 22 leads Joe to a secret pathway where living people can access it. 22 explains that this is the place where people go when they are on hallucinogenics or inspired. Suddenly, Joe realizes that he was here when he was playing the piano test with Dorothea. While observing the landscape, Joe sees a creature wandering around nearby. When the creature notices their presence, it starts chasing them. When the two are cornered against the rock, a giant ship appears and traps the creature. After the boat stops, Captain Moonwind disembarks to greet 22 and Joe. After the introduction, Moonwind orders his crew to release the lost soul and return it home by performing a ritual. The ritual gets rid of the creature's anxiety and obsession. Once the ritual is complete, the creature turns back into a normal soul again. After the ritual, one of the crew takes Moonwind's staff and draws a circle on the ground. The portal which allows the spirit to return to its body opens. Excited by what he sees, Joe takes the staff and draws another circle. But, instead of opening a passage to his body, it opens a passage to the great beyond. Joe's soul becomes increasingly disconnected from his body. To reconnect the body to the souls, Moonwind draws a large circle on the ground and asks Joe to focus on his body. Then Joe sees himself lying on the hospital gurney. Joe tries to jump back into his body. But, in the midst of the confusion, he ends up dropping 22, along with him, into the tunnel into the human world. When the duo regains consciousness, 22 possesses Joe's body, while Joe ends up in the body of the hospital's pet cat. When the doctor comes to check on Joe, Joe tries to explain the situation. But he is in the body of a cat. They only hear the cat meowing. 22 tries to explain what is going on, but Joe steps in and tries to dictate what she should say. 22 tries to tell the doctor about the School of Souls in the great beyond. The doctor thinks it is the side effect of the medications and puts him under watch. Joe proposes to 22 to escape from the hospital to find the human version of Moonwind before the staff will take him away. But, since 22 has never been in a human body before, 22 struggles to walk. Eventually, they manage to sneak out of the hospital. When they were outside, 22 panicked because of the loud noise and chaos in New York City. Joe tries to calm her down and make her move. But Joe in the cat's body scratches her instead. Feeling pain for the first time, 22 runs away in shock. Joe begins to search for 22 until he finds her sitting in the alley in shock. To calm 22 down, Joe steals a slice of pizza from the store and gives it to 22. When 22 tastes it for the first time, she falls in love with the smell and taste of the pizza. After the meal, 22 calms down, and the duo continues their mission to find the human version of Moonwind. When they eventually find him, 22 runs up to him and starts shaking him around, causing him to fall off from his astral trance. When Moonwind finally takes control of his body again, he tells the duo that they can exchange bodies only when the new hole between Earth and the astral plane aligns. It will only happen at 6:30. While waiting for that time, Joe and 22 order a taxi home. But Dorothea spots and recognizes 22 in Joe's body. At home, while Joe starts planning for the evening, the duo receives a call from Curly. Curly let them know that Dorothea would not hire Joe because she sees Joe in hospital clothes in the middle of the street. Then, Curly tells Joe to not give up hope and suggests that Joe should show up at the theater to ask for the job back anyway. Joe tells 22 to put on his suit. But, out of nowhere, a student named Connie shows up at the door to tell him that she is quitting music because it is a waste of time. Agreeing with the girl, 22 locks Joe inside the room and encourages Connie to quit both music and school. But, upon seeing her performance, 22 is moved. Now she encourages her to follow her dream. Feeling encouraged by Connie, 22 now wants to give human life a chance to experience new things like taking a hot bath and brushing her teeth. When the time comes, Joe asks 22 to put on the suit and try to cut her hair. But, because he is a cat, so ends up putting a hole in her hair. Joe then decides to take 22 to the barber. At the hair salon, 22 in Joe's body gets a very nice haircut, perfect for the concert. Elsewhere, in the spirit world, the Cower finally finds Joe's file and realizes that he has come back to Earth. He immediately starts hunting Joe down by going to the hospital. Then, he follows the trails and finds Joe and 22 leaving the barber shop. While trying to capture the duo, the Cower ends up taking the soul of an innocent person. Unaware that they have been followed, Joe and 22 walks to the location where the Moonwind guides them. On the way there, 22 bends down to pick up an object but ends up tearing Joe's pants. With no other choices, Joe decides to take 22 to his mother's sewing store. Joe asks 22 to lie about performing at the concert because he did not think his mother would approve. At the sewing store, everyone already knows about the concert with Dorothea. When 22 met Joe's mother, she shows her the rips and asks if she can mend them. But she refuses to help and gets mad at her son for refusing to take a steady job. Joe complains that his mother never supports him and asks 22 to leave. Finally, understanding how Joe's feeling, Libba regrets not supporting her son. She gave her late husband's suit to Joe. Now Joe is finally ready for the concert. So he walks to the theater to meet Moonwind. While they wait, 22 sees a father playing with his daughter. It makes her reflect. Now she wants to be reborn and live among humans. At 6:30, Moonwind arrives and begins to prepare the ritual. But, with the sudden realization that she wants to be a human now, 22 runs away. Joe starts chasing 22 to the subway. But, unfortunately for the duo, the Cower finally spots them and takes advantage of the stretch station to open the gate to the world of souls. Upon entering the world of souls, Joe and 22 are separated and brought back to the grate. Joe and 22 start fighting. Jerry interrupts the fight when they realize that 22 has finally managed to find her spark and complete the badge. While 22 is confused, Joe starts yelling at 22 for living his life as an intruder. Jerry stops the fight before it escalates and then asks Joe to take 22 to the portal to Earth. When they reach the portal, 22 is still mad at what Joe said. So she throws a badge at Joe's head in anger. Then, she disappears into thin air. Instead of going after 22, Joe goes to Jerry to ask what her spark was. Jerry explains that her spark is the will to be alive. Though Joe does not really get what Jerry meant, he takes 22's spark and jumps into the portal. Joe regains consciousness in the middle of the station. Then, he rushes to the theater to meet Dorothea. Breaking into her dressing room, Joe tries to convince her to give him an opportunity. Dorothea agrees to let him perform. After Joe goes on stage and performs with the band, he manages to win over the audience and gets hired as the new pianist for the band. After the concert, Joe asks Dorothea what is to come next. To his surprise, Dorothea replies by saying, "Just more performances, one day after another." Her answer makes him feel empty inside. He feels like his dream has come true. Yet, nothing has changed in his life. Joe begins to reflect on his journey. He comes to realize that it was all for nothing. After long reflection on what has been going on with him in the last few days, he realizes that 22 wants to be alive. Joe wants to make amends. So, he goes home and plays the piano in a very inspired way. Then he goes into the astral plane. In the spirit world, Joe meets Moonwind and asks for his help to find 22. Elsewhere, 22 has become a lost soul. Determined to help her, Joe asks Moonwind to bring her back. Moonwind starts sailing to look for 22. When they finally find her, they try to capture 22 with a net. 22 dives deep into the ground and sinks the ship, causing Moonwind to return to Earth. When 22 surfaces, she starts running around in desperation. Joe corners 22, who feels trapped and decides to flee to the grate. Seeing the rogue spirit, the coward tries to stop her. But Rogue 22 easily overpowers other spirits. In fear, Rogue 22 runs wildly and throws any spirit that she can pick up at Joe. But she eventually gets distracted and is cornered by Jerry at the portal to Earth. Finally, 22 stops. Joe tries to talk to her and gives her the pass back. But he ends up getting eaten by 22. Inside 22, Joe sees a flashback of all the times her mentors humiliated her. He now understands that this is why she never discovered her spark. Determined to help her at all costs, Joe manages to find 22 at the center of the storm and frees his friend. After 22 regains her consciousness, Joe returns the pass to her and accompanies her as she leaps through the portal. As he and 22 fall into the world of the living, Joe is teleported to the treadmill of the great beyond. Just as he is ready to go through the great beyond, Jerry shows up to thank him. Then, Jerry says that he decides to give him another chance to live. Back in his body, Joe learns his lesson and starts to enjoy every second of his life. Thank you for watching. We are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers to get monetized. Please take a minute to click subscribe. Also, we recently released an animation recap on Ant Armageddon. Click here if you are interested.